Stand
world of
firm,
royal
boy! The
protection,
kingdom
there
of
exists a
Mercy.
moment every
We
security
charge!
professional dreads.
Now prove your
the
worth!
split second when protocol meets
Attention,
chaos.
young sir!
When years of training
Yes, sir.
collide with the
Very good.
unpredictable
Stand ready.
reality of
I
protecting
will,
the most
sir.
precious members of the monarchy. It's a moment that can define careers, reshape security measures, and remind everyone that even behind the grandest walls and most sophisticated systems, danger can emerge from the most unexpected places. What happens when a single shout from a royal guard freezes an entire room, stopping conversations mid-sentence and turning all eyes toward a 10-year-old prince? What kind of threat could be so immediate, so terrifying, that it would cause seasoned protection officers to abandon all pretense of discretion and react with the urgency usually reserved for wartime? This is the story of those crucial seconds that nearly changed the course of royal history. A moment when the difference between safety and catastrophe came down to one guard's instincts, one desperate warning, and the lightning-fast reactions of people trained to put duty before their own lives. It's a story that reveals the hidden world of royal security, where split-second decisions carry the weight of a nation's future, and where the line between normalcy and nightmare can disappear in the blink of an eye. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 23 years of Royal Protection Service had taught her that routine was everything, but today felt different. There was an electricity in the air that made the veteran security officer's instincts prickle with unease. Prince George, now 10 years old and growing more confident with each public appearance, was scheduled for what palace officials called a soft engagement, a carefully orchestrated meet and greet with local school children in the castle's staterooms. These events were designed to be low-key, almost casual by royal standards, but Matthews knew better than anyone that there was nothing casual about protecting the future king. The detective had been part of the Royal Protection Unit since Prince George was born. She had watched him take his first steps in Kensington Palace, seen him grow from a toddler who needed constant supervision to a young boy who could charm visiting dignitaries with his quick wit and genuine curiosity. But with that growth came new challenges, new risks that kept Matthews awake at night. As she walked through the castle's corridors, checking and double-checking security arrangements, Matthews reflected on how much the world had changed since she first took this assignment. Social media had transformed the landscape of royal protection. Every visitor now carried a device capable of broadcasting live video to millions of viewers worldwide. Every interaction could be recorded, analyzed, and potentially weaponized by those who meant harm to the royal family. The school group arriving today was from St. Mary's Primary School in nearby Eton. 30 children between the ages of 8 and 11, accompanied by 4 teachers and 2 parent volunteers. Each adult had undergone extensive background checks stretching back 15 years. Their social media accounts had been monitored for months. Their financial records, travel patterns, and even their shopping habits had been scrutinized by the palace's intelligence team. But Matthews had learned never to trust completely in background checks. People could change. Motivations could shift, and sometimes the most dangerous threats came from the least expected sources. The children had arrived at 9:30 a.m., their excitement barely contained as they were led through the castle's security screening process. Matthews watched from the monitoring room as each child passed through metal detectors while their small backpacks were thoroughly searched. The screening process had been designed to feel like a game rather than a security procedure, with uniformed guards joking with the children and making them feel special rather than suspicious. "All clear on the main entrance," came the voice of Sergeant James Morrison through Matthews' earpiece. Morrison was a 15-year veteran of the unit, a man whose attention to detail had prevented more incidents than the public would ever know. His calm, professional demeanor masked a warrior's instincts that had been honed through years of service in both military and civilian protection roles. Matthews acknowledged the report and continued her final walkthrough of the stateroom where the event would take place. The room itself was a masterpiece of royal architecture, with soaring ceilings decorated with intricate plasterwork, and walls lined with portraits of long-dead monarchs. But Matthews saw it differently. She saw sightlines and escape routes, potential hiding places, and vulnerable positions. The security team had spent weeks preparing for this 45-minute event. Every piece of furniture had been examined for potential threats. Every window had been secured and monitored. Even the flowers in the elaborate arrangements had been checked to ensure they contained nothing more dangerous than pollen. Prince George himself had been briefed on the day's schedule during breakfast. The young prince had developed a remarkable ability to balance his natural curiosity about the world with an understanding of the security requirements that governed his life. He knew to stay close to his designated protection officer, a friendly but formidable woman named Detective Sergeant Amanda Clark, who had become something of a big sister figure to the prince over the past 2 years. "The children are in position, ma'am." Clark's voice crackled through the communications system. "His Royal Highness is ready to begin." Matthews took her position at the edge of the room, where she could observe both the prince and the visiting children, while maintaining clear communication with the external security perimeter. The other members of the protection team were strategically placed throughout the space, their positions carefully calculated to provide maximum coverage while remaining as unobtrusive as possible. The event began exactly as planned. Prince George entered the room with his characteristic smile, immediately putting the nervous children at ease with his friendly greeting. The teachers had prepared the students well, coaching them on proper protocol while encouraging them to be themselves. The result was a delightful mixture of formal respect and childhood enthusiasm that brought genuine warmth to the grand surroundings. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded perfectly. The prince moved among the children, asking about their favorite subjects in school, listening to their stories about pets and hobbies, and sharing carefully chosen anecdotes about his own experiences. His natural charisma, combined with years of coaching from his parents and palace staff, made him appear comfortable and confident in his role. Matthews found herself relaxing slightly as she watched the interactions unfold. These were the moments that made her job worthwhile. Seeing the genuine joy on both sides as the future king connected with his future subjects. The children's faces glowed with excitement, and several of them would undoubtedly remember this day for the rest of their lives. But even as she allowed herself to appreciate the positive atmosphere, Matthews maintained her professional vigilance. Her eyes continuously scanned the room, monitoring not just the children, but also the adults accompanying them. She watched their body language, their facial expressions, their hand movements. Years of experience had taught her that danger often announced itself through subtle changes in behavior long before any overt action was taken. One of the parent volunteers, a woman named Rebecca Foster, seemed particularly nervous. She kept fidgeting with her handbag and glancing around the room in a way that caught Matthews's attention. According to the background check, Foster was a 34-year-old marketing executive whose daughter Emma was among the visiting students. Her record was spotless, her financial situation stable, and her social media presence unremarkable. But something about her demeanor set off alarm bells in Matthew's experienced mind. The detective subtly shifted her position to get a better view of Foster while simultaneously signaling to Morrison through their discreet hand communication system. The sergeant acknowledged the signal and began moving closer to the woman's position, his movement so casual and natural that no one in the room would have noticed anything unusual. Meanwhile, Prince George had moved to a display case containing historical artifacts that the children were particularly interested in. The case held several items from the reign of Queen Victoria, including an ornate letter opener that had been used in the Royal Correspondence Office more than a century earlier. The prince was explaining the historical significance of the items when Matthews noticed something that made her blood run cold. Foster's nervousness had escalated dramatically. She was now sweating despite the comfortable temperature in the room, and her hand kept moving toward her handbag in a repetitive motion that suggested she was building up courage for some kind of action. But what truly alarmed Matthews was the woman's eyes. They were locked on Prince George, with an intensity that went far beyond normal interest or excitement. The detective began moving toward Foster's position, her own hand instinctively moving toward the communication device that would instantly alert the entire security team. But before she could reach either the woman or her radio, Foster made her move. The marketing executive suddenly stepped forward, her hand diving into her handbag with purposeful determination. In that instant, Matthews realized that all their background checks and security measures had missed something crucial. Foster's motivations had somehow escaped their notice, and now the future king was potentially seconds away from facing a threat that could change everything. The room seemed to slow down as Matthews processed the situation. Foster was now less than 10 feet from Prince George, who was still engaged in conversation with the excited children, completely unaware of the danger approaching from behind. The other adults in the room were focused on managing their students and hadn't noticed Foster's suspicious behavior. The protection team, while professionally positioned, were too far away to intervene immediately if Foster produced a weapon. Matthews felt her training take over as adrenaline flooded her system. Every scenario they had practiced, every contingency plan they had developed, suddenly became relevant. But this wasn't a training exercise or a theoretical discussion in a briefing room. This was real, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The detective knew she had only seconds to act before Foster reached whatever she was searching for in her handbag. The wrong decision could result in unnecessary panic and trauma for the children. But the wrong decision could also result in something far worse. A tragedy that would haunt the royal family and the nation for generations to come. As Matthews prepared to shout the warning that would change everything, she caught Morrison's eye across the room. The sergeant had also noticed Foster's behavior and was already moving, but he was too far away to reach her in time. Clark, the prince's close protection officer, was on the other side of the display case, helping to manage the children's enthusiasm for the historical artifacts. Time seemed suspended as Matthews realized that she alone was in a position to prevent whatever Foster was planning. The responsibility felt crushing, but her years of training and experience had prepared her for exactly this moment. She took a deep breath, knowing that her next action would either save the day or create chaos, and opened her mouth to deliver the warning that would freeze every person in that room. "Stop! Nobody move!" Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and commanding with an authority that instantly paralyzed every person in the stateroom. The friendly chatter of children exploring royal history died immediately, replaced by a silence so complete that the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece suddenly seemed deafeningly loud. Prince George froze mid-sentence, his hand still pointing toward a Victorian-era inkwell in the display case. His 10-year-old mind, trained from birth to recognize and respond to security alerts, immediately understood that something serious was happening. Without turning his head, his eyes found Detective Sergeant Amanda Clark, his close protection officer, who was already moving toward him with swift, practiced efficiency. The 30 children from St. Tayo, Mary's primary school, stood like statues, their young faces reflecting confusion and the beginning stages of fear. Some had been in the middle of raising their hands to ask questions. Others had been leaning in to get a better look at the historical artifacts. Now they all remained perfectly still, their childhood instincts telling them that the serious tone of the police officer's voice meant this was no game. Rebecca Foster, the parent volunteer whose suspicious behavior had triggered Matthew's alert, stood frozen with her hand still inside her handbag. Her face had gone pale and sweat was now visibly beading on her forehead, despite the comfortable temperature in the room. The terror in her eyes suggested that she understood exactly how her actions had been interpreted, and the potential consequences that now faced her. Matthews felt time stretching as she assessed the scene she had created with her shout. Every person in the room was now focused on her, waiting for direction, waiting for explanation. The weight of 30 pairs of children's eyes, 4 teachers, 2 parent volunteers, and her own security team pressed down on her shoulders. She had successfully stopped whatever Foster had been planning to do, but now she had to manage a situation that could easily spiral into panic and trauma for the young witnesses. Sergeant James Morrison was the first to recover from the shock of the emergency alert. His 15 years of experience kicked in as he began moving toward Foster with careful, measured steps. His hand rested on his radio, ready to call for backup if needed, but his primary focus was on de-escalating the situation before it could traumatize the children any further. "Rebecca Foster," Morrison said in a calm, controlled voice that carried clearly across the silent room. "I need you to slowly remove your hand from your bag and place both hands where I can see them." Foster's eyes darted frantically between Morrison, Matthews, and Prince George. Her breathing had become rapid and shallow, and she seemed on the verge of hyperventilating. Whatever she had planned to do, whatever had driven her to this moment of crisis, was now colliding with the reality of being caught in the act by armed police officers in one of the most secure buildings in the country. "Please," Foster whispered, her voice barely audible across the room. I need to." "Ma'am," Morrison interrupted gently but firmly, "I need you to follow my instructions exactly. Remove your hand from the bag and show me your palms." Detective Sergeant Clark had reached Prince George's side and was now positioned between him and Foster, her body serving as a human shield while she maintained visual contact with Matthews for further instructions. The prince, to his credit, remained completely still and calm, his royal training overriding any natural childhood impulse to run or cry out. Matthews made a split-second decision that would later be analyzed and debated by security experts for months to come. Instead of treating Foster as an immediate physical threat requiring force, she chose to treat her as a person in crisis who might respond to calm professional de-escalation. "Rebecca," Matthews called out, using the woman's first name deliberately to establish a personal connection. "I can see you're upset about something. We want to help you, but I need you to help us first by showing us your hands." The other children's teacher, Mrs. Linbourne, Patricia Holmes, had been standing near the group of students when Matthew's alert had frozen the room. Now she faced a dilemma that no amount of classroom experience could have prepared her for. She needed to maintain control of 30 frightened children while allowing the police to handle what appeared to be a serious security threat. Her teaching instincts told her to comfort and reassure the students, but she understood that any sudden movement might be misinterpreted by the armed officers. "Children, Mrs. Dabney," Holmes said quietly, her voice steady despite her own fear. "We're going to play a statue game right now. Everyone needs to stay perfectly still and quiet until the nice police officers tell us we can move again." Her words helped some of the younger children understand what was happening in terms they could process, reducing the risk of panic while maintaining the security freeze that Matthews had initiated. Several of the older students had already figured out that something serious was happening, but they followed their teacher's lead and remained motionless. Foster's hand was trembling now, still buried in her handbag, as she struggled with whatever decision had brought her to this moment. Tears had started streaming down her face, and her entire body was shaking with what appeared to be a combination of fear and emotional distress. "I'm sorry," she sobbed quietly. "I'm so sorry. I thought maybe..." Morrison had moved close enough now that he could intervene physically if necessary, but he continued to speak in the same calm, reassuring tone. "Rebecca, whatever's troubling you, we can talk about it once you show me your hands. I promise no one is going to hurt you, but I need to know that everyone in this room is safe." Matthews felt her heart rate beginning to slow as she recognized signs that Foster was not, in fact, an assassin or terrorist, but rather someone experiencing some kind of emotional or psychological crisis. The woman's body language, her verbal responses, and her obvious distress suggested mental health issues rather than malicious intent. Prince George, still frozen in position near the display case, caught Clark's eye and mouthed silently, "Are the children okay?" The question revealed the character that had endeared him to the public from his earliest appearances. Even in a moment of personal danger, his first concern was for others. Clark nodded almost imperceptibly, conveying reassurance while maintaining her protective stance. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was actually less than 2 minutes. Foster's internal struggle was visible on her face as she wrestled with competing impulses. The desire to complete whatever action she had planned, fear of the consequences she now faced, and the growing realization that she was surrounded by armed professionals who were prepared to use force if necessary. Finally, with a sound that was part sob and part sigh of defeat, Foster slowly withdrew her hand from her handbag. What she revealed was not a weapon, but a small, worn photograph that fluttered to the floor as her trembling fingers lost their grip. Morrison immediately moved forward to secure the dropped item while maintaining his watch on Foster. But even from across the room, Matthews could see that it was a picture of a young girl, probably around Prince George's age, smiling at the camera in what appeared to be a school photograph. "That's my Emma," Foster whispered, her voice breaking. She was supposed to be here today. She was so excited. But yesterday the doctor said... They said the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place for Matthews. Emma Foster was indeed on the school list. She was Rebecca's daughter and one of the students who had been scheduled to meet Prince George today. But the child was nowhere to be seen in the group, which meant something had happened to prevent her attendance at the last minute. Mrs. Baccalari Holmes, still maintaining her position with the frozen students, quietly confirmed Matthew's suspicion. "Emma Foster couldn't come today," she said softly. "She was diagnosed with leukemia yesterday and started treatment immediately. Her mother was supposed to stay home with her, but she insisted on coming anyway to represent Emma somehow. The revelation changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Foster hadn't been planning an attack on Prince George. She had been planning to show him the photograph of her desperately ill daughter, probably hoping for some kind of royal acknowledgement or blessing that might comfort the child during her battle with cancer. But the security protocols that governed royal interactions, combined with Foster's obvious emotional distress and suspicious behavior, had created a perfect storm of misunderstanding. Her furtive movements and nervous behavior hadn't been the signs of a would-be assassin, but rather the actions of a desperate mother trying to work up the courage to breach protocol for her dying child. Matthews felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness wash over her. The immediate threat to Prince George had been neutralized. There had never been a real threat to begin with. But now she faced the challenge of resolving the situation in a way that honored the mother's desperate love, while maintaining the security and dignity that the royal visit required. Morrison carefully picked up the photograph and examined it before showing it to Matthews. The picture showed a beautiful little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile, wearing the same school uniform as the other children in the room. The innocence and joy captured in the image stood in stark contrast to the fear and tension that now filled the stateroom. Prince George, who had been listening to the adults' quiet conversation, suddenly spoke up in his clear young voice. "Can I see the picture, please?" he asked, looking directly at Detective Sergeant Clark. "If Emma can't be here today, maybe I could still meet her somehow." The request caught everyone off guard. Royal protocol was clear about unscheduled interactions and unauthorized materials, but the prince's genuine concern for the absent child touched something in the hearts of everyone present. Clark looked to Matthews for guidance, knowing that any decision made in the next few moments would require careful consideration of both security and humanitarian factors. Matthews realized that she was facing a defining moment, not just for her own career, but for the kind of monarchy that Prince George would one day represent. The choice between rigid protocol and compassionate flexibility would send a message that extended far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. The room remained frozen, waiting for her decision, as 30 children watched their future king show concern for a classmate he had never met, and a desperate mother clutched at her last hope for bringing some joy to her dying daughter's world. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews found herself at a crossroads that no amount of training could have prepared her for. The photograph of Emma Foster lay in Sergeant Morrison's hands like a bridge between protocol and humanity, between the rigid requirements of royal security and the desperate hope of a mother whose world was falling apart. Prince George stood perfectly still, but his eyes held an intensity that reminded Matthews why the monarchy had survived for centuries: the ability to connect with people's hearts even in the most formal circumstances. At 10 years old, he already understood that sometimes being royal meant more than following rules. It meant being human when humanity was needed most. Rebecca Foster had collapsed into quiet sobbing, her entire body shaking with the release of emotions she had been holding back since learning of her daughter's diagnosis. The other parent volunteer, David Chen, moved slightly closer to offer support while still respecting the security perimeter that Morrison had established. "Ma'am." Detective Sergeant Clark spoke quietly into her radio, addressing Matthews. "His Royal Highness is requesting permission to acknowledge the photograph. How would you like to proceed?" Matthews felt the weight of 30 pairs of children's eyes, 4 teachers, 2 parents, and her own security team waiting for her decision. Every choice she made in the next few minutes would ripple outward, affecting not just the people in this room but potentially the public perception of the royal family for years to come. The detective's mind raced through the implications. Allowing Prince George to interact with unauthorized material could set a dangerous precedent. Every future event could see desperate parents, petitioners, and attention seekers attempting to breach protocol with emotional appeals. But refusing this request in front of 30 children would send an equally powerful message about the coldness and inflexibility of royal institutions. "Morrison," Matthews called quietly, "secure the photograph for standard screening procedures, but treat Mrs. Foster as a distressed family member, not a security threat." The sergeant nodded and carefully placed the photograph in a protective evidence bag while speaking gently to Rebecca Foster. "Foster, I need to check this photo according to our standard procedures, but then we'll see what we can arrange for Emma. Can you tell me her full name and age?" "Emma Rose Foster," Rebecca whispered through her tears. She just turned 9 last month. She's in Mrs. Davies' class at St. Mary's. She was supposed to be standing right here with her friends, but yesterday everything changed. The doctor said she needs to start chemotherapy immediately, and she's so scared, and I thought maybe if Prince George could just know that she exists. Mrs. Patricia Holmes, the children's teacher who had been maintaining order throughout the crisis, felt her own eyes filling with tears. She had taught Emma Foster since the beginning of the school year and had watched the bright, energetic girl blossom into one of her most promising students. The thought of that vibrant child lying in a hospital bed while her classmates met the future king was almost unbearable. Emma is one of our brightest students, Mrs. Dana Sauls, Holmes added quietly. She's been preparing for this visit for weeks. She memorized facts about the royal family and practiced her curtsy every day after school. When we heard yesterday that she couldn't come, the whole class was heartbroken. Prince George, who had been listening to every word with the focused attention that marked him as different from other children his age, suddenly stepped forward slightly. "Detective Clark," he said formally, "I would like to make a request as a member of the royal family." The formality of his language caught everyone's attention. This wasn't a child asking for a favor. This was a prince exercising what he understood to be his prerogative to make decisions about his own interactions with the public. "Your Royal Highness," Clark responded, matching his formal tone. "What is your request?" "I request permission to send a personal message to Emma Foster and to have this visit dedicated to her memory of what she missed today. These children are her classmates and friends. They should be able to tell her that she was remembered and honored in her absence." The sophistication of the prince's request stunned the adults in the room. At 10 years old, he had instinctively grasped both the human drama of the situation and the larger symbolic importance of the royal family's response to suffering among their subjects. Matthews felt a surge of pride in the boy she had been protecting since his birth, but also a new level of responsibility. Prince George was demonstrating the qualities that would make him an exceptional king, but those same qualities could also make him vulnerable to manipulation by those who might exploit his compassionate nature. "Your Royal Highness," Matthews said carefully, "your request shows great kindness, but we need to consider how to honor Emma's situation while maintaining proper security protocols." Morrison, who had been conducting a quick examination of the photograph, looked up from his inspection. "The photo is clean, ma'am. Standard school photograph. Approximately 6 months old. No unusual materials or markings. Mrs. Foster's behavior is consistent with parental distress rather than hostile intent." The sergeant's assessment provided Matthews with the opening she needed to find a middle ground between rigid protocol and unlimited security. Had been maintained, the threat had been evaluated and dismissed, and now they could focus on managing the human element of the crisis. "Foster!" Matthews addressed the distraught mother directly. "I understand your desire to honor your daughter's absence, but approaching His Royal Highness without permission created a security concern that could have had serious consequences for everyone in this room." Rebecca Foster nodded miserably, understanding that her actions, however well-intentioned, had potentially endangered the very children she had wanted to help celebrate this special day. "However," Matthews continued, "His Royal Highness has made a request that we believe can be accommodated within appropriate security guidelines." Prince George looked hopeful, but remained perfectly still, understanding that this was still a security situation that required adult supervision and approval. Matthews activated her radio to contact the Palace Communications Office. "This is DCI Matthews requesting immediate consultation with the Private Secretary's office regarding an unscheduled humanitarian request from His Royal Highness during the St. Mary's school visit." While they waited for guidance from the palace hierarchy, the children remained remarkably well behaved. Their teacher's explanation about the statue game had helped them understand that they needed to stay still and quiet, but their young minds were processing everything they had witnessed. This was not the royal visit they had expected, but it was certainly one they would never forget. Several of the older children had begun to understand the situation involving their absent classmate. 10-year-old Marcus Webb, who sat next to Emma in their regular classroom, whispered quietly to his friend Sophie, "Emma would be so excited that Prince George knows about her now." Mrs. Holmes overheard the comment and felt her heart break a little more. These children, in their innocent way, had already grasped something that many adults struggled with, that sometimes the most important moments happen Not because of what we plan, but because of how we respond to the unexpected. The radio crackled to life as the palace private secretary's office responded to Matthews' request. ACI Matthews, this is Jeremy Hartwell, Deputy Private Secretary. We've been briefed on the situation. His Royal Highness's request is approved with the following conditions. Any message must be pre-approved by communications, no media coverage of the special arrangement, and all participants must sign confidentiality agreements regarding the security breach that preceded the request. Matthews felt relief wash over her. The palace's response showed both flexibility and wisdom. They would honor the prince's compassionate instincts while protecting the security protocols that kept him safe. Understood, sir. How would you like us to proceed with the message? His Royal Highness may dictate a brief message that will be transcribed by palace staff and delivered through official channels. The visiting children may also contribute if they wish, under teacher supervision. The entire process must be completed within the scheduled visit time frame. Prince George's face lit up with genuine joy at the news that his request had been approved. For a moment, he looked exactly like what he was, a 10-year-old boy excited about the chance to do something kind for another child. Detective Clark, he said eagerly, may I speak with Emma's classmates about what message they would like me to send to her? Clark looked to Matthews for final approval. The detective considered the situation one more time. The security threat had been neutralized, proper authorization had been obtained, and the visiting children were about to witness their future king demonstrate the kind of leadership that valued compassion alongside duty. Permission granted, Your Royal Highness, Matthews said formally. You may proceed with the message, under Detective Clark's supervision. As Prince George turned toward the group of children who had remained perfectly still throughout the entire crisis, Matthews realized that what had begun as a potential security disaster was transforming into something far more valuable. A teaching moment that would shape both the future king and the children who witnessed his response to human suffering. Rebecca Foster, still emotional but no longer a security concern, watched through grateful tears as the prince approached her daughter's classmates with the photograph of Emma clutched carefully in his young hands. The image of the future king holding the picture of her sick child would be burned into her memory forever, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, compassion could break through the barriers of protocol and position. The transformation in the stateroom was remarkable. What had been a scene of frozen tension just minutes before now buzzed with the quiet excitement of children who had been given permission to participate in something extraordinary. Prince George stood before Emma Foster's classmates holding her photograph with the careful reverence of someone who understood its precious significance. Can everyone tell me something special about Emma? Prince George asked, his voice carrying the natural authority that came with his position but tempered with genuine warmth. I want to make sure she knows that her friends were thinking about her today. The response was immediate and heartwarming. 30 hands shot into the air as children who had been statue still for several minutes suddenly came alive with stories about their absent classmate. Detective Sergeant Clark positioned herself where she could supervise the prince while maintaining security awareness. But even she found herself smiling at the enthusiasm of the young voices. Emma is the fastest runner in our class, called out Marcus Webb, the boy who sat next to Emma during regular school days. She won the Year 4 race on sports day, and she said she was going to tell you about her medal today. She's really good at maths, added Sophie Chen, David Chen's daughter. When I don't understand fractions, Emma always helps me figure them out. She makes it seem easy. Emma has a pet rabbit named Mr. Whiskers, contributed 8-year-old Oliver Thompson. She brings pictures of him to show and tell, and she taught him to do tricks. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews watched the scene unfold with mixed emotions. Her professional training kept her constantly alert for any new security concerns, but her human heart was deeply moved by what she was witnessing. This was not the sterile, controlled royal engagement that had been planned. This was something organic and genuine, a group of children sharing their love for a friend with someone who had the power to comfort her during the most frightening experience of her young life. Patricia Holmes took careful notes as the children spoke, knowing that every detail they shared would be important for the official message that would eventually reach Emma. The teacher's eyes filled with tears as she listened to her students describe their classmate with such affection and specificity. These children saw Emma not as a victim of disease, but as their friend who happened to be facing a scary challenge. Rebecca Foster, Emma's mother, stood quietly to the side, still being monitored by Sergeant Morrison, but no longer considered a security threat. She listened to each child's contribution with growing amazement. As a parent, she thought she knew everything about her daughter's school friendships, but hearing these detailed accounts of Emma's daily interactions revealed depths of connection she hadn't fully appreciated. "She always shares her sandwiches at lunch," said 9-year-old Hannah Price. "My mom sometimes forgets to pack enough food, and Emma always gives me half of hers. She says friends should look after each other." Prince George nodded thoughtfully at each contribution, occasionally asking follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely interested in learning about Emma as a person, rather than simply going through the motions of royal duty. "What's Emma's favorite subject in school?" he asked Mrs. Holmes. "History, Your Royal Highness," the teacher replied. "She's particularly fascinated by the Tudor period. She wrote a wonderful essay about Queen Elizabeth I last term, arguing that she was one of the greatest monarchs because she understood how to balance strength with diplomacy." The prince's eyes lit up with interest. "That's one of my favorite periods, too. My father has told me lots of stories about Queen Elizabeth I. She had to make some very difficult decisions to protect her people." Matthews noticed how naturally Prince George connected Emma's academic interests with his own royal heritage. Even at 10 years old, he understood that monarchy was about more than ceremony. It was about the responsibility to serve and protect the people of the realm. "Your Royal Highness, Mrs. Dixie." Holmes ventured carefully. "Emma was particularly excited about meeting you because she had prepared several questions about what it's like to be part of the royal family. She wanted to know if you ever get nervous about your future responsibilities." The question was more sophisticated than typical childhood curiosity, and it clearly touched something in Prince George's developing understanding of his role. He considered his response carefully, understanding that whatever he said would eventually reach not just Emma, but also her classmates who were hanging on his every word. "I do get nervous sometimes," he admitted with a maturity that surprised the adults in the room, "but my parents and grandparents have taught me that being nervous is normal when you care about doing something important well. They've told me that the best way to handle nervousness is to focus on helping other people rather than worrying about yourself." The honesty of his answer resonated with the children, who could relate to feeling nervous about important things in their own lives. Several of them nodded in recognition, understanding that even princes faced fears and uncertainties. Detective Clark, who had been working closely with Prince George for 2 years, was struck by the sophistication of his response. The prince was demonstrating emotional intelligence and leadership skills that went far beyond his chronological age, qualities that had been nurtured by his parents but also seemed to come naturally to him. "Would it be appropriate," Prince George asked, turning to Matthews, "for me to tell Emma that I understand what it's like to be nervous about difficult things, and that I hope she knows how brave her friends think she is?" Matthews consulted briefly with the palace communications office through her radio before responding. "Your Royal Highness, that would be very appropriate. The private secretary's office suggests that you might also want to acknowledge her academic interests and her kindness to her classmates." Prince George nodded and began dictating his message while Mrs. Again. Holmes transcribed his words. The process took nearly 15 minutes as he carefully crafted each sentence, occasionally asking the other children for their input or asking Matthews for guidance on protocol issues. "Dear Emma," he began, "I had the wonderful opportunity to meet your classmates from St. Mary's Primary School today, and they told me so many special things about you. I learned that you're an excellent student who loves history, especially the Tudor period, and that you're always kind to your friends by sharing your lunch and helping them with their studies." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "Your friends also told me that you were excited about meeting me today, and I want you to know that I was excited about meeting you too. Even though you couldn't be here in person, you were here in the hearts and minds of everyone who knows you," the prince continued, his voice growing stronger as he found his rhythm. "I heard that you're going through some medical treatment right now, and I want you to know that being nervous or scared about difficult things is completely normal. I get nervous too, especially when I think about the responsibilities I'll have when I'm older. But my family has taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you are afraid." Several of the children wiped away tears as they listened to their future king speak directly to their absent friend. The gravity of the moment was not lost on them. They were witnessing something historic and deeply personal simultaneously. "Your classmates wanted me to tell you that they miss you and that they're thinking about you every day," Prince George continued. "They described you as someone who is not only smart and fast and kind, but also as someone who makes school a better place for everyone around you. Those are the qualities that make a real difference in the world." He looked around at the children before concluding his message. "I hope that when you're feeling strong enough, you'll visit Windsor Castle for a proper tour. I would love to show you some of the Tudor artifacts we have in our collection, and I think you would enjoy seeing Queen Elizabeth I's actual writing desk. Until then, please know that you have friends who care about you, and a future king who considers it an honor to know about your courage." The room fell silent as Prince George finished dictating his message. Even Matthews, hardened by years of security work, found herself moved by the genuine compassion and thoughtfulness the young prince had demonstrated. Mrs. Holmes looked up from her notes, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your Royal Highness, this is beautiful. Emma will treasure this message forever." Rebecca Foster, who had been listening from her position near Sergeant Morrison, finally spoke up through her tears. "Your Royal Highness, I can't thank you enough. Emma has been so frightened about starting treatment, but knowing that you took time to think about her specifically, it will mean everything to her." Prince George smiled, the formal weight of his dictated message giving way to natural childhood pleasure at having done something good. "Mrs. Foster, would it be okay if I signed the photograph of Emma to send back with the message? That way she'll have proof that I really did see her picture and learn about her from her friends." Matthews nodded approval for the request, recognizing that the prince's instinct to provide tangible proof of their interaction showed sophisticated understanding of what would comfort a frightened child. As palace staff prepared to process the message and arrange for its official delivery, Matthews reflected on how dramatically the day had evolved. What had begun as a routine security assignment had become a masterclass in leadership, compassion, and the delicate balance between protocol and humanity that would define Prince George's eventual reign. The children from St. Mary's Primary School had witnessed something far more valuable than a standard royal meet and greet. They had seen their future king demonstrate that true leadership meant caring about individuals, even those who couldn't be present to advocate for themselves. 3 hours after the incident that had frozen the stateroom at Windsor Castle, the ripple effects were already spreading far beyond the historic walls where it had taken place. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews sat in the secure debriefing room, surrounded by incident reports, security assessments, and the beginning of what would become one of the most analyzed royal protection events in recent memory. The immediate aftermath had proceeded smoothly. Prince George had completed his scheduled engagement with the St. Mary's Primary School children who left Windsor Castle with a story that would be told and retold for generations. The official message for Emma Foster had been expedited through proper channels and would be delivered to her hospital room within hours. Rebecca Foster had been counseled and released with a formal caution. Her desperate maternal instincts understood even as the security breach they had created was thoroughly documented. But Matthews knew that the real impact of the morning's events was only beginning to unfold. "The Palace Communications Office is requesting a full timeline of the incident," reported Sergeant James Morrison as he entered the debriefing room with a stack of preliminary reports. "They want to understand exactly how Mrs. Foster's emotional state escalated to the point where you felt compelled to issue an emergency alert." Matthews nodded, still processing the complexity of what they had experienced. "The background checks were thorough and accurate," she said thoughtfully. "Rebecca Foster had no history of mental health issues, no criminal record, no connections to any groups or individuals that might pose a threat to the royal family. But none of our screening procedures could have predicted how a parent would react to their child's sudden cancer diagnosis. This was the challenge that kept royal protection officers awake at night. Traditional security threats, terrorists, assassins, mentally unstable individuals with histories of violence could be identified and managed through established protocols. But emotional crises that transformed ordinary citizens into unpredictable actors were far more difficult to anticipate and prevent. Detective Sergeant Amanda Clark, who had been Prince George's close protection officer throughout the incident, offered her perspective. His Royal Highness demonstrated remarkable composure and emotional intelligence throughout the crisis. Even after understanding that there had been a security alert, his primary concern was for the visiting children and for Emma Foster specifically. The assessment was important for multiple reasons. Prince George's behavior during the incident would be studied by palace officials, security experts, and eventually historians as an indication of his fitness for future royal responsibilities. At 10 years old, he had faced an unexpected crisis and responded with maturity, compassion, and leadership that exceeded what anyone might reasonably expect from a child. The children's reactions were equally impressive, Morrison added. 30 students between the ages of 8 and 11 maintained perfect discipline throughout the security freeze, and then participated thoughtfully in the message creation process. Their teachers deserve significant credit for their classroom management under extraordinary circumstances. Matthews was particularly interested in analyzing how the incident had been perceived by the children who witnessed it. These young people would grow up with memories of the day their future king had acknowledged their sick classmate, demonstrating that royal duty included caring for individual subjects who were suffering. The impact on their understanding of monarchy and public service could influence their relationship with the royal family for decades to come. The phone rang, interrupting their debriefing session. Matthews answered to find Jeremy Hartwell, the deputy private secretary, on the line, with an update that would add another layer of complexity to the day's events. DCI Matthews, Hartwell began, I wanted to inform you that Emma Foster's response to His Royal Highness's message has been quite remarkable. The child apparently broke down in tears of joy when the message was delivered, and she's asked her mother to request something that puts us in a delicate position. Matthews felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. The morning had already produced one unexpected situation involving the Foster family. She hoped they weren't about to face another. What is the child's request, sir? Emma Foster would like to donate her hair to a children's cancer charity before she loses it to chemotherapy treatment, and she wants to do it in honor of Prince George's kindness to her. She's asking if there's any way the prince could be aware of her gesture. The request was touching but complicated. Any acknowledgement of Emma's hair donation would require careful consideration of precedent, media management, and the potential for creating unrealistic expectations among other families facing similar medical crises. Sir, how does the palace want to handle this? We're still discussing options, but His Royal Highness has already been informed of Emma's request, and he's asked if he might be permitted to make a small charitable contribution to the organization she's chosen for her hair donation. He wants to do it anonymously, but with Emma's knowledge that the contribution was made in her honor. Matthews felt a surge of pride in the young prince's continued demonstration of thoughtful leadership. Even hours after the original incident, he was still thinking about Emma Foster and looking for ways to support her courage. That seems like a very appropriate response, sir. It acknowledges her gesture without creating unmanageable precedents for future similar situations. As Matthews hung up the phone, she realized that the incident was evolving into something much larger than a security event. It was becoming a case study in modern monarchy, how traditional institutions could adapt to show genuine care for individual citizens while maintaining the boundaries necessary for practical governance. Morrison looked up from his paperwork with a thoughtful expression. Ma'am, I've been thinking about the screening procedures that missed Mrs. Foster's emotional vulnerability. Her daughter received her cancer diagnosis less than 24 hours before the scheduled visit. Even if our background checks had been conducted the morning of the event, they wouldn't have detected the crisis that was driving her behavior. The observation highlighted a fundamental challenge in contemporary royal protection. The speed of modern life meant that a person's threat assessment could change dramatically in the time between background screening and actual contact with the royal family. Medical emergencies, family crises, financial disasters, or relationship breakdowns could transform a previously stable individual into an unpredictable risk factor. We're going to need to develop protocols for last-minute psychological assessment of event participants, Matthews decided. Brief interviews or questionnaires that might identify people who are dealing with acute emotional stress, even if they pose no malicious threat. Clark nodded in agreement. It would also be helpful to have clearer guidelines for how to respond when His Royal Highness makes spontaneous requests to deviate from security protocols for humanitarian reasons. Today's situation worked out well, but we need consistent procedures for evaluating and approving such requests. The discussion was interrupted by another phone call, this one from the palace press office. Matthews listened carefully as she was briefed on the media management challenges the incident had created. DCI Matthews, We've had several inquiries from journalists who somehow learned about an incident during the school visit today. We need to coordinate our response to ensure that any public statements align with security considerations while being honest about His Royal Highness's compassionate response to a family crisis. The media aspect added another dimension to the morning's events. The story of Prince George's response to Emma Foster's situation was exactly the kind of human interest narrative that could generate positive coverage for the royal family. But it also carried risks. Publicizing the security breach that had preceded the prince's humanitarian gesture might encourage others to attempt similar approaches to royal family members. What's the palace's preferred approach to media inquiries? Matthews asked. We're planning to confirm that His Royal Highness made a special effort to acknowledge a student who couldn't attend today's visit due to illness, but we won't be providing details about the security concerns that preceded this gesture. We need you to ensure that your team's statements align with this approach. After ending the call, Matthews turned to her colleagues with a new appreciation for the complexity of their morning's work. What had seemed like a straightforward security incident had evolved into a multifaceted challenge involving protocol, compassion, media management, and long-term implications for royal family interactions with the public. The most important lesson from today, she said thoughtfully, is that our job isn't just about preventing threats to the royal family's physical safety. We're also responsible for creating space where they can demonstrate the values that make monarchy relevant and meaningful to contemporary society. Morrison and Clark nodded in understanding. They had all witnessed something special that morning. A young prince choosing compassion over convenience, a group of children learning about leadership through example, and a security team adapting their procedures to accommodate the human elements that made their work meaningful. 6 months later, Emma Foster would be declared cancer-free after successful treatment. Prince George would send her a personal note of congratulation, and she would frame it alongside the original message and signed photograph from the day she couldn't attend his visit to her school. The incident at Windsor Castle would be remembered not as a security breach, but as a defining moment in the character development of a future king who understood that true leadership meant caring for individuals, even when, especially when, no one was watching. Matthews would carry the memory of that morning throughout the rest of her career, a reminder that the most important moments in royal protection weren't always the dramatic incidents that made headlines, but the quiet choices that revealed character and shaped the kind of monarchy that would serve the nation for generations to come.